Welcome to the Nevada State Capitol. And I thought I'd start out by telling you a little bit about the early history of the building, but in order to do that, I have to tell you a little bit about the early history of Carson City because these two things are related. In 1858, we had three men, and they were trying to start a new life. And they decided that they would start that new life in Genoa, which is a town about 13 miles from here. Well, they came by stagecoach, and the first thing they did is when they got off the stagecoach, they started to look for land because they were looking for places to put their businesses. These were business people. They discovered that the prices of land were in Genoa were outrageous. Well, Mr. Curry, who was the head of the group, he told the good people of Genoa that he could do a whole lot better than this. In fact, he could start his own town, and that is exactly what he did. So he and his two friends, Frank Proctor and John Musser, they came north about 13 miles, and they came to an area called Eagle Valley. Now, Eagle Valley was nothing like beautiful Genoa. I mean, there was nothing here, and I mean nothing. The land was already occupied by John Mankin. Our three men approached Mr. Mankin, and they asked him if he would like to sell. And he said, "Oh yeah, sure, sounds good to me." And they asked him, "Well, how much do you want?" Well, he wanted $1,000. Wow, $1,000 in 1858? We're talking real money here. However they got the money, they did. And they got title to the property. The first thing they did is they sent one of their friends to Dayton, which is a town to our east, about 10 miles. And he was to bring back a surveyor. And he did. And the man's name was John Long. And he set to work right away. He started to put all the streets down, set them up. He subdivided all the land. And then when he was finished, he wanted to get paid. So he came to Mr. Curry and asked for his money. And Mr. Curry said, "Wait a minute, I have one more job for you. And I'd like you to set a kind of a large plaza area out. And this is going to be the Capitol." And we honor Mr. Curry today with a beautiful statue to the south of our building here. And it shows a young Mr. Curry, and he has a kind of a rolled up set of plans. And the plaque says, "A man with a vision." And boy, he sure was. A little bit about the Capitol building itself. It was made of sandstone, and the sandstone came from a local quarry about 2 miles from here. The legislature in 1869 authorized $100,000 for its construction. And the first order of business was to get an architect to do the work, and his name was Joseph Gosling. And he did a beautiful job. And we still have these plans, by the way, and they're at the State Museum, and they've recently been restored. Well, after we had the plans in hand, the next item on the agenda was to have all the contractors come together and to give bids. The winning bid was submitted by a local company, Peter Kavanaugh and Son. And they said that we can build the Capitol building for $84,000, which sounds like a huge amount of money, and it was in 1870. But, you know, it was actually under budget. I mean, they had allocated $100,000, and they had already had a bid for 84. Pretty good. Unfortunately, they had a little thing called cost overruns. Yes, they had them in those days too. And by the time the building was finished, the project had mushroomed to $170,000. The building was completed in 1871. In the original design, they wanted to have an imposing building suitable for a governmental building. And they wanted something that was beautiful. And so they used kind of a Grecian cross design. They also wanted it to be fairly good size so that when you were viewing it from the street, you know, this is a government building, this is important. It's about 112 feet from the surface to the cupola. And then we add another 40 feet for the flag pole. There is a myth that the dome was made out of silver. It never was. The dome was tin plated and then it was painted silver to give the appearance of silver. As you come into the Capitol, this corridor, you notice this beautiful statue of Sarah Winnemucca. She was a member of the Northern Paiute tribe. She wrote a book. It's called Life Among the Paiutes. And this is indicated by this statue, and she's holding a book. That is her book. The very first book written by a Native American woman. By the time she was 14, she could speak 5 languages. She spoke the 3 Indian languages here. We had Washoe, Shoshone, and Northern Paiute. And she also spoke Spanish and English. She wanted to go to a school in California, and they said no, because she was an Indian. So she experienced discrimination right away. But that didn't dampen her enthusiasm for education, and she started the very first school for her people at a ranch that was owned by her brother. She would go to Washington. She'd go anywhere back east to talk about her people and the wrongs that had been done to her people. One of the other things you notice as you come into this entering hallway are these beautiful portraits. And these are former governors of the state of Nevada. Now, our current governor is shown with a photograph. That's Brian Sandoval. And then when he leaves office, we will make a oil portrait of him and place it right next to the governor's office, the exit door. This is the governor's reception area. And so if you wanted to meet the governor, you'd first have to come here to make an appointment. This is the second floor of the Capitol building. We had a large elliptical opening, and you could originally see right into the dome. Now, this caused a couple of problems. First, we had an echo on the second floor, and two, we had bats. They lived up there, causing all sorts of havoc. In 1977, we had a project to make the building strong for earthquakes and fire, and it took about 4 years to complete. But when they did complete it, they actually enclosed that so you could no longer look into the dome. But as a consequence of that, we no longer have any problems with bats. We are now in the old assembly chamber, and from 1871 until 1969, this served as the lower house of our state legislature. In this chamber, we used to have a portrait of this gentleman, Abraham Lincoln, and this portrait is called the Nevada Lincoln. When I was a kid, I was taught that the reason Nevada came into the Union was because of our gold and our silver. You know, that's not the exact truth. The real reason had to do with politics. In 1864, Abraham Lincoln was going for a second term, and it wasn't altogether certain he was going to win. There were two other people running against him. And I think he realized that, and he was trying to find an advantage, a political advantage. And they thought, well, what better way than to bring in a new state that's favorable to the Republican Party. Now, the Republicans controlled Congress at that time, and so they passed what was called the Enabling Acts, which was kind of like a blueprint on how to become a state. And one of the provisions of that act was that we were to send our state constitution to Washington for approval by the president to make sure that we didn't have any provisions about slavery and that we had a Republican form of government. We had a big election here in September of 1864, and the people of Nevada, at that time only the men could vote, they voted for our state constitution. Well, once that was done, it came to Governor Nye, and he said, wow, this is really important, and I don't want to make any errors. And so I'm going to make two copies of our state constitution. And I'm going to send one by sea by way of San Francisco, and I'm going to send the other one by coach to Washington. And he was sure that one or both of these documents would get to Washington before the election. They never got there. So about 2 weeks before the election, our governor gets an urgent message from the Secretary of State saying essentially, what happened? We can't proceed with your statehood until we get that document. Well, what was our governor going to do? I mean, it was only had 2 weeks before the election. And he said, you know, there's this new thing called the telegraph. Why don't we send our entire document by telegraph? It had never been done before. And that is exactly what he did. Now, we were kind of fortunate here in Carson City. We had two gentlemen, and they worked for the California Telegraph Company, Mr. Hodge and Mr. Ward. And they said, we'll do it for you. And that is the message. It's actually one word. It's Nevada. Our document was really long, and I mean long. It was 16,543 words. And you can see how long it took me just to do that one word. I mean, I'd still be here doing the document, but fortunately they were skilled. Well, once it got to Washington, they had to transcribe it into handwriting, and they presented it to President Lincoln. President Lincoln looked at it, and he saw that it met all the requirements, and he said, sounds good to me, and he signed off on it October the 31st, 1864. And that day, Nevada Day, is celebrated even today. And every year, we have a beautiful parade celebrating Nevada's admission to the Union as the 36th state. This is the new legislative building of Nevada. The legislature used to be in the old Capitol building, which we just were at. But by the late 1960s, it became obvious that was inadequate. We needed a lot more room. And so they moved to this new building. So the final session was in 1969 in the old assembly chambers. And then we came here. The building was constructed in 1970, and we had our first session in 1971. We are unlike most legislators in that we do not meet every year. We meet every other year. And when we do meet, we only meet for 120 days. You know, I think really it's because we're a small state and we feel that if the legislators are here longer, they might spend more money. And there's always a trend to go longer and longer. And there's always a resistance. We want to keep it as it is. This every 2 years that they meet. And it gives us control, I think, as citizens of the state of Nevada. We call this our citizen legislature. They don't get paid very much money. In fact, they only get paid about $140 a day. And they don't get paid for the entire time that they're here. They only get paid for the first 60 days. So these people really come out of their own businesses. Some of them are teachers, some of them are business people, ranchers, miners. They come from all walks of life. And this is really a financial sacrifice for them. The Capitol building represents the people and the state of Nevada. It's an integral part of our history. And much history was made right in this building. And it's continued to be made at our legislative building. The governor, lieutenant governor, controller, treasurer, and the Secretary of State have their offices right here in this building. And so we're continuing to make history.